Days before the event, the Pulwama terror attack took place in India. It was a very difficult time for all of us, but we went ahead with the summit because we decided that it was important to talk about terrorism in all its forms. Today, as I stand before you, the world is fighting the coronavirus. Lives are being lost. There is panic, there is fear, and yet we are here. Because we believe it is important to engage, to put our energies and ideas together. Our world is facing unprecedented challenges, from new diseases to old wars, from melting ice caps to hardening borders, from questions about the future of democracy to injustices of the past. Humankind is at a crucial crossroads. What we say and do today will determine our tomorrow. It is said that if you want to resolve conflicts, you should begin with the 1% commonality and not the 99% differences, and that shall be our endeavor today, to find that common ground, to chart a collective path. The theme of this third edition of the Beyond Global Summit is Navigating and Negotiating Global Imperatives. The idea is to have meaningful and fruitful conversations, to identify our collective imperatives, to negotiate our collective challenges, and to navigate as one force to reach a collective destination, that of a multilateral rules-based order that provides for everyone, that gives equal opportunity to all. Once again, a very warm welcome to all of you. It is my pleasure to invite on stage Mr. Sudhir Chaudhary, Editor-in-Chief and CEO of Beyond, to deliver the welcome address.
Good morning. His Excellency Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, the former Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Honorable Minister for Defence in Maldives, Her Excellency Ms. Maria Didi, His Excellency Mr. Pawan Kapoor, India's Ambassador to the UAE, our distinguished dialogue partners, and ladies and gentlemen. I welcome all of you to the third edition of the Beyond Global Summit. I'm very happy to welcome all of you here today because of two reasons. One, because Dubai is very special to us at Beyond. It is here, as Palki told you, we began our journey. We debuted our global summit in the same hall last year. The second edition was held at Columbia University in New York. And we are back here for the third edition now. And hopefully, we'll again meet next year. The second reason is because this summit is not like any other summit. We never wanted the Beyond Global Summit to be just another platform where people come, they deliver their speeches, and they go back. Our dialogue partners are not just speakers, they are stakeholders, and that's why we don't call them speakers. We say they are our dialogue partners. The last time we came to Dubai, we were just beginning this journey, and I can share with you very honestly today that we started with a lot of apprehensions. We were not sure about the outcomes, the hurdles along the way, and our own ability to trigger effective change. Because the basic reason behind holding such events and such seminars is not just to create some TV content, but are we making some changes in our society, the way we work, the way we think? So that's very important for us. But 1 year on, I can say with a lot of pride and confidence that Beyond has emerged as a credible and respected voice, not just in our own country, that is India, but across the world. And I want to share two examples with you. First, as you know, US President Donald Trump was in India recently. US President Donald Trump was watching and retweeting Beyond stories. And it was very heartening to see that the President of the United States, just before he starts his India visit, he is observing us, he's watching us, and not just watching us, but he is also sharing our stories with his followers. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also posting WION's reports on social media. World leaders and opinion makers watch this channel for its factual and research-based coverage. And that is what makes us different from other channels. Another good news I wanted to share with you today is last month, WION won 7 prestigious news broadcasting awards, including the award for the best international news channel in India and the jury's choice for the best English news channel. Thank you. WION as a product has progressed because our viewers have shown faith in our mission. And that's why I call it a mission, which makes us again different from other channels. Our aim is not to be world's most watched channels. We don't want to be screaming breaking news channels as you see these days. We want to be the most loved and the most trusted channel. We don't want hype, we want harmony. We don't want to exploit conflicts for TV ratings. We want to create avenues for collective growth. Journalism and the news media, the world over, is losing its credibility. And we hate to discuss this. And I have no qualms in accepting this today in front of all of you. When I sit down and think about it, I feel that news media all over the world is now disconnected from the lives of the common people. Media now works for powerful people. They cater to vested interests directly or indirectly, pushing somebody's agenda. Newsrooms have become war rooms now. They keep complaining about the credibility about this crisis, but do nothing to address it. So we thought that we should be the first one to address this issue. Ladies and gentlemen, this summit is a bid to change that, to change this situation, to bring a solution to this crisis of credibility. We are brainstorming to address the issue of the people and to seek solutions. And I want to highlight this word, solutions, today. The whole idea is to create an intellectual property which is not just new, but also very, very different and effective. We have a very old habit of talking only about the problem and then keep talking about it. We rarely come up with solutions. And this is the basic idea of today's event, this summit, that we come out with some solutions. So I would request all our dialogue partners also that when they finish up, they should not just highlight the problem, but they should also come up with some solutions to offer. When we say that we want to address global issues which touch your and my life, irrespective of the country we live in, then we should also create solutions which address our collective challenges. The world has become a difficult and divided place today. Governments work to remain in power rather than uplift their people. Leaders race against rivals to retain their regional dominance rather than serve their people. On the other hand, the common man continues to struggle with the basic problems of life. We want to create consciousness to change that. Our approach is futuristic and our effort is sincere. It's a very honest effort. We are the only channel that broadcasts daily reports on climate change, because climate change is not just fashion for us. These days you must have seen people love to talk about climate change without actually meaning anything. So at WION we started this initiative, honest and sincere initiative, to make our viewers aware about problems like climate change. Because it's a common man's problem now, and it affects everybody in this entire world, irrespective of the country, region, caste, creed. We don't just report stories, we also invest in issues. So today, if we conclude with a feeling of united purpose, all these problems, if they can unite us together, I think this summit would qualify as a huge success. Let me use this opportunity to especially thank the government of the UAE for facilitating this summit in Dubai. I want to thank each and every one of you for participating here, especially our dialogue partners who took time to come here. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to WION World is One Global Summit, Navigating and Negotiating global imperatives. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. WION, as you said, is more than a channel. It's a mission for those of us who work with it, who are associated with it. We believe in the concept of Vasudev Kutumbakam. And for those of you who do not follow Sanskrit, it basically translates to the world is one family. That's where we draw our name from. The world is one. And as a family, we engage and invest in one another. We have differences, but we try to resolve them. I take immense pride in introducing to you the concept of WION.
The new India is one with the world. And WION is the voice of the new India, the chronicle of a new world order. On World is One, we feature stories of change. Stories of hope. Stories that inspire. Stories that transform. Stories that unite. World is One is your window to the world.
Deadlier than the ISIS.
News that is delivered fast, without fear or favor, with all shades of opinion. World is One is a platform for intelligent discussion. As India's first international news channel, we are breaking barriers between India and the world.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as he's just concluded his speech.
WION's groundbreaking programming cuts the clutter. When big stories break, WION takes you there. Conversations that set the agenda. Incisive interviews. Events that push for solutions. Our first global summit in Dubai drove the conversation on the World Wide Web.
I thank Z Network and the World in One news channel for organizing
India's best international news channel. India's best English news channel. Trump watches WION before he lands in India. Israeli Prime Minister tweets WION's story. WION, World is One, awarded in India, acclaimed the world over.
Shaping the narrative with facts, perspective, and cutting-edge journalism. WION, World is One.
After 2 successful editions, WION Global Summit is back with a power-packed lineup of a carefully curated list of experts underlining India's role in the changing world order, highlighting the changing power dynamics, the urgency of climate change, and a global thinkers forum with leaders who matter. Welcome to WION Global Summit 2020, navigating and negotiating global imperatives.
Thank you. Let me also thank our sponsors for this event: Platinum Partner TVS, Knowledge Partner Amity University Dubai, State Partner Uttar Pradesh Sarkar, Travel Partner Air India, State Partner the Madhya Pradesh Government, Silver Partner Godrej Expert Rich Cream, Silver Partner General Insurance Council, Print Partner UAE Khalij Times, and Print Partner India, The Hindu. Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to welcome on stage our chief guest and guest of honor for this summit, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, former Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, to deliver the keynote address. Please welcome on stage Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe.
He has served as the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka on 5 occasions and leads the largest and oldest party in the country. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Ranil Wickremesinghe.
Your Excellencies, Mr. Sudhir Chowdhury, CEO and Editor-in-Chief of WION, His Excellency, Mr. Pawan Kapoor, Indian Ambassador to the UAE, and 2 of my friends, Her Excellency Maria Didi and His Excellency Ram Mahadeva, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to be at the third edition of the World Global Summit. WION is not only India's first international news channel, but also a pioneer amongst the South Asian electronic media in creating a global platform to present the geopolitical analysis of recent global trends. This is welcome at a time when South Asia is growing in importance. The critical challenges we face include the ability to succeed in the economic integration of the South Asian region, making us the fourth trading bloc, to manage the regional conflicts, the geopolitical impact of these development matters both to us and the rest of the world. You are providing the analysis which will help us to charter our course. We are assembled here today to deliberate on how to navigate and negotiate the global imperatives of today. Let me outline a few of the trends for which we must be prepared. The world is suddenly experiencing an unprecedented multi-area transitions. Never since the Industrial Revolution, which started 200 years ago, have political, economic, social changes interacted simultaneously, as is now beginning to take place. Virtually unprecedented in history. So much of this is so rapid that policymakers do not have time to adjust. This transformation was aptly described by His Holiness Pope Francis as, "This is not merely an era of change, but a change of an era." This is an era which is witnessing the end of the Western global dominance, an era being shaped by new forces. One, the sudden rise of China in economic, military, and political spheres, challenging the unipolar world by attempting to remodel the existing global order. The resulting globalization is shaping a new global competition in all spheres. Two, the climate change. We are today witnessing the impact of the climate change due to industrialization, GDP growth, and population growth over 2 centuries. Melting glaciers, increase in the ocean temperatures, and the rising sea levels. An impact of such magnitude, which resulted in a schoolgirl, Greta Thunberg, today a household name, challenging the US President Donald Trump. The rules-based model on which globalization rests is facing challenges. A good example is the World Trade Organization grinding to a halt. Transnational actors who are expected to uphold these rules are acting their self-interest and withholding such support. Technology brings about far-reaching changes in the systems of global governance. And fourthly, the rising importance, the geostrategic importance of South Asian region and the Indian Ocean. Politically, we are living in a multipolar world where every major power center has suddenly begun to experience unexpected internal pressures of serious kinds. China, 1 year ago, was very strong and stable. Now, coronavirus has rapidly destabilized the economy. For the first 3 decades, the country, ever expanding international affairs, is brought to a halt by a virus which is testing its health services to the limit. Maybe it is only China that can face trade war and coronavirus simultaneously. They face Trump and coronavirus, and they are passing it down to us now. America, the major economic and military power, political dividers as never before, heading for an uncertain election. A new America First policy has abandoned the sole superpower concept and is alienating friends, has resulted in a new attempt to function with a fewer allies than before. EU, one of the great political achievements of our time, now divided and weakened with a rising anti-EU right. A Brexit which has left UK searching for trade partners in all corners of the world with an uncertain impact on the medium-term economy. They are also now feeling the impact of the coronavirus. I read today the first European regional airlines Flybe has collapsed due to the disease. And UK has stated they are shifting from containing the outbreak to delaying the outbreak. Big companies like Sony, Apple, Nike are closing down their offices in different parts of Europe. Russia, technically strong nuclear power, who's now trying to make the international political systems adjustments and fearful of the sudden drop in oil prices. This is the basis of its economic power. Middle East, I need not expand, now unprecedentedly divided with divisions getting worse. So much of this was unexpected and so recent and very destabilizing. Economics. The continuing shift of balance to Asia and its interconnectedness is making the whole system vulnerable to regional developments with enormous speed. Best example is coronavirus, which has resulted in China, the factory of the world, bringing the global value chains either to a halt or to a slowdown, affecting a number of other economies. For example, Sri Lanka's own apparel trade is coming to a halt because we can't get our fabrics from China. We have seen the upsides of globalization. Now we are facing the downside of globalization. The GDP growth worldwide is projected to slow down further in 2020, witnessing the lowest growth after ending of the financial crisis in 2009. The temporary truce in US-China trade war may end after the US presidential election. Recommencing the trade war will create a further negative impact on the global trading system. There is unlikely to be a change for the better in regard to the weakness of the Japanese economy. The Indian Ocean, the lifeline of global commerce, is now witnessing the competing strategies of US and China. A complete contrast to Henry Kissinger's US, Pakistan, China triangle. The road from ping-pong diplomacy to Trump-Modi diplomacy. The new China-centric Belt and Road Initiative is being countered by the US Indo-Pacific concept and the Quad. As a result, South Asia is faced with competing Chinese and US strategies. An intensified arms race in the region is the consequence. Nevertheless, India is promoting a more inclusive approach than the minilateral Quad while reaching out cautiously to China. We in South Asia must determine our own destiny. History has taught us the consequence of promoting outside involvement for short-term gains. All military and political power rests on economic power, which we lack. Economic integration of our region is the only answer. It is also a disincentive to war. Then, are we to be caught amidst outside competing strategies or be secure within our own strategies? A few decades of unprecedented speed, dislocation, disruption of major powers may lead the way in shaping this new era. Building capacity and staying relevant has therefore become our biggest challenge. The primary task of policymakers is now to fashion a new global agenda that will be able to cope with the sudden arrival of black swans, crises without much notice, and shape mechanisms of regional and global response because existing mechanisms have proven to be inadequate. These have to be inclusive, youth-oriented, regionally balanced. The traditional model was heavy on the participation of governments and established institutions. The most effective future model will have to be something much wider and more horizontal than vertical. Part of these efforts will have to focus on new forms of education, both formal and informal, and the development of new funding sources. For instance, an international tax of a few pennies on each mail. Now, I made myself an enemy of most of you. Next 15 years are going to be critical in defining and creating platforms for shaping the rest of the 21st century. If we do not make use of this opportunity, we could have a world of deadly chaos. So let me conclude by emphasizing, first, time is not on our side. Events cascade with an urgency that calls for action. If we do not respond, others with less benign objectives will forestall us, and the opportunity to shape prospects and capture the imagination of the next generation will be lost. Second, as we know, the confidence of younger people today in the existing mechanisms of government is not very high. We need to provide some organizing structure that will build enthusiasm and can eventually mobilize private-public cooperation across age barriers. Building for the future must also make stakeholders of those whose lives will unfold in the future. This is why I believe our priority should not only be to urgently answer the questions we have discussed, but as important to question are traditional answers. The WION Global Summit should be a starting point in such an effort, should be reconvened with more specific agenda soon to that end. This summit should set up a steering group to organize specific further efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind words. We hope to accomplish all that you've outlined for the WION Global Summit, this one and the forthcoming ones. The India-UAE relationship, you would know, has taken giant strides in the last few years. In 2015, Prime Minister Narendra Modi became the first Indian Prime Minister to visit this country in 34 years. Before him, it was Indira Gandhi in 1981. So you can imagine the significance of the visit and what it has done to boost bilateral ties. What Prime Minister Modi set in motion has been furthered by the Indian Embassy in the UAE. And I'm very happy to announce that we have with us His Excellency Mr. Pavan Kapoor, India's ambassador to the UAE, with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Excellency Ambassador Pavan Kapoor on stage to deliver the welcome note on behalf of the host nation.
His Excellency Pavan Kapoor, India's ambassador to the United Arab Emirates.
Good morning, everyone. Former Prime Minister, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege and pleasure for me to be here today at this global summit organized by WION in the UAE. This year's effort on part of WION to navigate and negotiate global imperatives by bringing together a diverse set of policymakers and influencers is a useful one, and I'm glad to see that it has yet again attracted very high-level participation. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you here in the UAE, especially when we're finding many other events are being postponed or cancelled, as you heard, because of the coronavirus. And while you will be negotiating and navigating through global imperatives, as you heard Palki mention, I will be focusing on the imperative of the India-UAE relationship, which is a critical one. I've been here only 4 months in the UAE, but I've already felt the warm and affection of our Emirati friends all over the country. This is the result not just of the close relationship between India and the UAE at the government level, but in fact even more so given the history and the present-day connect between the peoples of our two countries, many of whom are present here today. Even though formal diplomatic relations between India and the UAE are just under 50 years old, our people have lived and worked together for centuries. Indian spices were traded for Emirati pearls long before oil was discovered in the UAE. It is the strong foundations of the past that have enabled us to develop such deep and multifaceted relations in our times. The fact that we've now had 5 consecutive years of exchange of visits at the highest levels between India and UAE is a testimony to the strength of our relations and this has helped us develop a comprehensive strategic partnership. You heard from Palki about Prime Minister Modi's visit to the UAE in August 2015, which certainly was a path-breaking one that imbued a new energy into our relationship. This was followed in 2016 and 2017 by state visits to India by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and again, this was reciprocated by the Prime Minister of India, again coming back to the UAE in February 2018 and August 2019. During his visit in August 2019, in fact, the Prime Minister was honored to receive the UAE's highest civilian award, the Order of Zayed. In mid-November 2019, our External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, participated in the Sir Baniyas Forum and had excellent exchanges with His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Foreign Minister. Earlier, and this is also significant, in 2019, our then External Affairs Minister, the late Srimati Sushma Swaraj, had visited Abu Dhabi in March as guest of honor at the OIC Foreign Ministers meeting, yet another example of our growing cooperation. Today, ladies and gentlemen, our partnership cuts across a diverse set of areas, ranging from trade and investment to defense and energy to food, tourism, and culture. Our bilateral trade stands at around $60 billion and is almost completely balanced in terms of exports and imports. India has been receiving equity and portfolio investments from the UAE in the past few years. Most of these investments have been concentrated in the sectors of services, power, construction and real estate, air transport including air freight, and hotel and tourism. The UAE has in principle agreed to invest up to $75 billion through the India-UAE Joint Infrastructure Investment Fund. On its part, the Government of India has also been taking measures to facilitate these growing investments from the UAE into India. In this regard, we were pleased to recently remove the foreign investment limit of 10% of issued capital by all sovereign funds of a country clubbed together, especially for the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, or ADIA. Further, in the recently announced Union Budget of India on February 1, we also announced the extension of beneficial tax treatment of ADIA to all its wholly owned subsidiaries. We hope that these special gestures for the UAE will lead to greater investments into India, not only by ADIA, but also by other sovereign funds in the UAE. Cooperation in the field of energy has become one of the pillars of our partnership. We rely on the UAE for the stable supply of crude oil and liquefied petroleum gas. We've also been pleased to invest in the offshore Lower Zakum concession and are also exploring for oil in Abu Dhabi's onshore Block 1. We have welcomed UAE's partnering us in the establishment of our first strategic petroleum reserve in Mangalore. At the same time, both our countries are also concerned about the adverse impact of fossil fuels on the environment, and since you have a session on climate change later on, this is significant. I'm pleased to say that we are looking at working together with UAE not only in multilateral fora like the IRENA, which is based in Abu Dhabi, or the International Solar Alliance, of which India is a key and founding partner, but we are also looking at partnering directly in the field of renewable energy. It is an interesting fact that many of you may be aware that the largest solar plant in the world is just outside of Abu Dhabi. In addition, we see great potential to cooperate in the field of food security and are working with UAE entities to secure large investments into India's food sector as part of the proposed India-UAE Food Security Corridor. But as mentioned earlier, it is our community in the UAE which is the foundation of strong India-UAE ties, something that is well appreciated by the leadership of both countries. The fact that over 3.4 million Indians now live and work in the UAE is a reflection of the closeness we feel and the comfort level we have in this country. Our Emirati friends tell us that Indians are well known for their hard work and peaceful and law-abiding nature. The growing success of Indian businesses is visible to all, and the number of homegrown entrepreneurs is a positive reflection of the opportunities that they have received in the UAE. The Indian community in the UAE has done us proud, as it continues to make tremendous contributions both to the economy of the UAE as well as to the economy of India. With a view to further ease travel of Emiratis to India, we announced just over 3 months ago the visa on arrival facility for them. This makes UAE only the third country in the world and the first in the region to be extended this special facility by India. With over 1,000 flights per week to more than 12 destination points in India and less than 4 hours of travel time, we hope this special visa facility will encourage more Emiratis to travel to India, even at short notice. The year 2020, ladies and gentlemen, holds great promise for the UAE, and we would like to avail of this potential through an even stronger partnership between India and the UAE. We are looking forward to the Expo in Dubai, starting in October this year. The work on the India Pavilion is well on track, and we hope to have a large presence of companies and states to display the full diversity of India. Our pavilion will showcase India on all three pillars of the Expo, that is, opportunity, sustainability, and mobility, emphasizing the massive developmental strides being made by India, as well as our technological prowess and steps taken to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. We also look forward to the strong participation of the Indian business community, again, several of whom are present here today, in the UAE to ensure that the legacy of the India Pavilion lasts for many years to come. Now, you heard from the welcome address also that Dubai is one of the favorite destinations for Indians, and it is true. We have several millions visiting here each year. And in addition, we were very pleased that a recent decision of the UAE government to waive visa fees for all Indian nationals visiting the Expo. And we hope that this will incentivize and encourage more Indians to visit UAE during this period. Along with our host, the UAE, we want to make and will work to make Expo 20 a great success. And on that positive note, I want to wish all of you very productive deliberations as you navigate the world, and wish you also a very pleasant stay in the UAE. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for the first session of the day. India and the emerging world, nationalism, multilateralism, and creative diplomacy. There's a lot to discuss, but I'll first like to invite on stage Mr. Ram Madhav to please open the session.
Born in the East Godavari district of Andhra Pradesh, he joined the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh as a full-time worker nearly 4 decades ago, going on to become a member of the Board of Governors of India Foundation and National Secretary of the Bharatiya Janata Party, where he's also in charge of the BJP's affairs in Jammu and Kashmir and the Northeast. Please welcome Ram Madhav.
His Excellency Shri Ranil Wickremesinghe, my good friend, Her Excellency Ms. Maria Didi, Ambassador of India, all the eminent dignitaries, friends, and the team of WION. My namaskars to all of you. In a coronavirus world, this is the best way to greet each other. I thank the WION team for giving me the opportunity to set the tone for the panel. Friends, India has arrived. It is no longer the old, reticent, and romantic India anymore. We are a pragmatic nation. We are proactive, and more importantly, we are a very ambitious nation today. Our ambition is to rise as an influential and responsible global power. Friends, in the 21st century, the world has evolved into a multipolar entity. India, with its 1.3 billion population, a vibrant and successful democracy, and an economy of nearly $3 trillion size, fifth largest in the world, is today an important pole in this multipolar setting. India is playing a key role with renewed enthusiasm and vigor on the global theater. We are loved by many, hated by some, but remember, can be ignored by none. Friends, the institutions of global governance like the United Nations, the Security Council, the Bretton Woods institutions, etc., were all the products of a time when the world was divided into two opposing camps in the last century. The efficacy and the efficiency of these institutions has eroded with the changing and new world order today. This erosion can be seen all over, but it is much more pronounced in our own neighborhood. We see challenges to Geneva Convention, UNCLOS regulations taking place in our own neighborhood. India believes that a time has come for the world to revisit these institutional frameworks so that they can remain relevant in the 21st century world. Most important reform needed was to make the nations of the new world, like India, the ASEAN nations, etc., greater stakeholders in the institutions of global governance. Friends, India lives in a neighborhood that has emerged as the 21st century powerhouse. The Indo-Pacific region is the most happening region in the world today. It was the Pacific Atlantic in the last century. But the global power axis has moved away from that region and today settled down in the Indo-Pacific region. Indian Ocean has emerged as the epicenter of global trade today. Nearly 50% of the global container trade passes through Indian Ocean. Nearly 70% of the energy lines pass through the Indian Ocean region. It is here that world's largest, some of the largest, as well as some of the newly fastest growing economies are situated today. It is here that populations with purchasing power exist. On a slightly different note, it is here that you will find so many warships above and submarines below roaming about. It is one area which is spending heavily in defense today. Friends, in this most happening region, the centrality of Indian Ocean to global trade cannot be understated anymore. And let me add that the centrality of India to Indian Ocean also cannot be understated. The importance of Indo-Pacific as the new global power axis cannot be missed anymore. And the centrality of the ASEAN group of nations in the Indo-Pacific also cannot be overlooked. India's Act East, Act Fast policy is a key foreign policy dimension of it. As an important power in the region, India is committed to managing the affairs of the region on the principles of inclusivity, freedom of navigation and overflights, and secure and open trade lines. Countries in the most happening region of Indo-Pacific must give up one-upmanship in their policy initiatives and follow the principle of stakeholdership. Nothing should be thrust on other countries as a fait accompli. Finally, friends, India's grand arrival on the global stage can very well be testified by the confident, de-hyphenated foreign policy that it adopts in its bilateral relations. Prime Minister Modi has introduced this de-hyphenation as an important dimension of our foreign policy, and I'm happy to say that many leaders in the world today accept and reciprocate. India's success in this policy of de-hyphenation can be gauged from the fact that we have strong standalone bilateral relations with a number of countries in the world. We have strong bilateral ties with the US, with China, and with Russia at the same time. We are friends with the Saudis, and we are also friends with Iranians. Our relations with Israel have grown substantially in the last few decades, but we firmly stand by the just demands of the Palestinians as well. Prime Minister Modi displayed a unique leadership quality of building strong interpersonal relations with many important world leaders, including President Xi Jinping of China, President Putin of Russia, and President Trump of the US. It has helped in all these countries to de-hyphenating India in their bilateral relations. The standalone two-day visit of President Trump to India 10 days ago is the latest example of it. Let me just say a few words before I conclude about the US-India relations. Prime Minister Vajpayee described US and India as natural allies. We have strong bilateral trade and people-to-people relations. Close to 4 million strong Indian diaspora is an important bond between our two countries. But friends, the relationship at present is much more than that. The upgraded US-India relations are a defining one for both the countries and also the larger world in the 21st century. We must not overlook the fact that the early decades of the 21st century have witnessed the rise of authoritarianism, terrorism, and anarchist liberalism in the world. World is becoming less democratic than before. In such a scenario, the coming together of the world's oldest and richest democracy and the world's largest and most successful democracy, namely US and India, signifies a coalition of nations to fight against these very tendencies. Together, the two countries can work towards global peace, democratic liberalism, and universal prosperity. Friends, unlike the past few decades, India is now eager to play a bigger role in the 21st century global governance. Our hosting of the G20 Heads of Nations Summit in 2022 is a proof that India has arrived. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. From non-alignment to strategic autonomy, from finding its feet post-independence to claiming its rightful place at the global high table, India, with its impeccable democratic credentials, its multicultural society, its expanding market, its young workforce, is ready to constructively disrupt the global order. Our first session today will focus on India's place in the emerging world and the themes that guide India's trajectory.
The world's largest democracy, home to over 1.4 billion people, 9 religions, and nearly 20,000 mother tongues. 73 years since independence, India is setting global rules. New Delhi is talking real issues with a push for peace. As India recognizes the need for multilateralism more than ever today, it is expanding its global footprint with daring policies, strategic alliances, creative diplomacy, an influential diaspora, and a move towards robust governance. India is ready to lead the world. Session 1, India and the Emerging World, Nationalism, Multilateralism, and Creative Diplomacy. Joining us on this session are Ram Madhav, National General Secretary of the BJP and member of the Board of Governors at the India Foundation. General Joginder Jaswant Singh, former Chief of the Indian Army. Air Chief Marshal Pradeep Vasant Naik, former Chief of the Indian Air Force. Manoj Ladwa, founder and CEO of the India Inc.
Thank you. Requesting the dialogue partners to please join us on stage. Forward from where Mr. Ram Madhav left. In 2010, US President Barack Obama said that India is not a rising power anymore. India has risen already. And since 2014, Prime Minister Modi has taken active interest in foreign policy. He has focused on harnessing India's soft power. He has engaged with the diaspora. He's focused on cultural diplomacy. He has engaged with West Asia, this region. And he's taken a leadership role in issues that impact all the people in the world, like climate change. How has all of this elevated India's position in the global order? That's what we'll discuss today. The first point of discussion, sir, is nationalism. And nationalism is being talked about a lot. Nationalistic politics has taken center stage, not just in India, but across the world. It's a political buzzword, and yet many tend to see it as a pejorative. How do you see nationalistic politics, and how do you see the opposition to it?
Nationalism in history has seen different phases. Until the advent of Hitler and Mussolini's version of nationalism in the last century, nationalism per se was not a bad word. Europe's experience in the middle of the last century, because of mainly the dictatorial and cruel regimes of Hitler and Mussolini, has probably given a negative connotation to the idea of nationalism. But today, after the world has passed through different experiences in the last about 60, 70, 80 years post the Second World War, the world again has started finding its own importance, its own relevance in the global thinking, global understanding of it. The Foreign Affairs Journal has brought out a special edition on the nationalism discourse in 21st century. It is very educative and enlightening to go through various articles that were published in that. In the 21st century, the rise of nationalism in different parts of the world is largely based on protecting or promoting the interests of one's own country, one's own nation, It is not and it should not be the narrow idea of nationalism against somebody else. It is and it should be about protecting the interests of one's own country, at the same time working for the larger good of the world. As far as India is concerned, we have always looked at nationalism from the larger and more beneficial and benevolent definition that it is for the good of every individual citizen in your own country, your own nation, while as a nation you will work for the larger good of the world, which in India we describe as Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole world as one family.
General Singh, what we see in India is what is being called a unique brand of cultural nationalism. It draws from a national identity that is proud of its linguistic, cultural heritage, its territory. And yet, in some quarters, it's compared to fascism. What sort of bearing does this brand of nationalism and this identity have on India's foreign policy?
Palki, thank you for a wonderful question. But if you permit me, I'd like to go to the rostrum and make my point from there and come back here, because it will be more effective. I'm sorry, but I follow a little different way. हट के करता हूँ जो करता हूँ, उसका effect और होगा. So let me ask the audience, you want me from there or from here? As I feel comfortable.
As you feel comfortable, of course.
Thank you. Can I have the man who puts the maps on to put on 3 maps very quickly so that my talk is a little more coherent? Yeah. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the map of the world as seen from a satellite, courtesy National Geographic. I'm one of the few generals who's been to the headquarters in Washington and interacted with them. This is presented to me by the chief cartographer. Now, it looks very nice, very beautiful. But see what Ram Madhav had covered so comprehensively is where is India located and which ocean is named after a country. Only one. That's Indian Ocean. That means Indian Ocean is not just up to where India's end is and then Sri Lanka. The island territories are coming right down to the equator. So this is the sphere of influence of India. And Indian culture went east and went west, and therefore India is not just India, what you see now, political India. India was Hindustan. Hindu Kush mountain range ke east mein pura Hindustan tha. There nobody knew any other. It was called Al-Hind by Arabs. It was called Hindu by the Chinese. And the French called it land. L-and. That means India was the only place known here. China, if you see, is towards the east, and it's got a huge land mass called Tibet. I'll show you another one. Please show the next map. See, this is the mountains which are all in red are 6,000 meters high. You cannot imagine the above Alps, that is Tibet. And there China is on the right of it, the green area. So you can understand that the clash of civilization never took place between China and India because of this barrier. It's a huge barrier, and Tibet is the fountainhead of all the major rivers of the Asian ecosystem. Now here I also want to mention to you that the areas of Saudi Arabia and others, and I'll show you a third one so that you understand something more. Please go to the next one. See, this is a satellite picture taken at night. Now, this is very revealing. It's not just a photograph. If you study it deeply, I will give you a few pointers. Just north of India is blank. There is nobody living there. Nobody can live there. There are no houses. There are no light. All these are lights. And if you see in the area where we are, there are red lights. They are all the oil fields. From this satellite picture, you know where the oil wealth of the world lies. And you see in Siberia, and you see Saudi Arabia. What I'm trying to bring out is The Sahara Desert in Africa, blank. Nobody lives there. It's not sustainable. So when somebody says so-and-so country is bigger than India, they are wrong. Because if Tibet is there, Gobi Desert is there, Mongolia is there, where can they grow food for more people? So really speaking, look at India. On the contrary, every part of India is illuminated, and that is the progress we have made. Very few people analyze it this way. This is the proof of the pudding. So you talked about every bit of it is done, and if we have left some portions uncovered, that's deliberate. We have mineral resources, we don't want to touch all of them at the moment. So it's a strategy, it's a great grand strategy. So India is a country with intelligent people. Civilization has gifted us an IQ level much higher than average. Much, much higher. And our geniuses are true geniuses. So now I'm trying to come to the fact that, well, the world's focused on India and China. Whatever you may say, and as Ram Madhavji said, India cannot be ignored. And on top of that, I would say as a military man, and I'm sure Air Chief Marshal Pradeep Naik will bear me out, that India cannot be transgressed or trespassed anymore. If you do it, it's at your peril. And we proved it. It's not a unipolar world anymore, and therefore India will have to now start thinking aggressively how, in a positive manner, I would say, how to play our rightful role in the region first, and then in the global stage. But don't think that our place is already there. I'd like to just a nuanced difference between Ram, what you have said. We are there. But just to reach the final spot is not guaranteed. We have to get our act together in many other ways. And therefore, for the time being, I'll leave my discourse at this place. Thank you, Palki.
Thank you, sir. May I very humbly recommend a career in TV as well, because you've come armed with graphics and you know what you're going to say. So the point where I'll go on to what China and the region as well, but I want to be done with the idea of nationalism. And national security, Air Marshal Naik, is a very important aspect of nationalistic politics. How has India's firm response in the recent past, whether it be the surgical strikes or the Balakot response, fed to this nationalistic narrative, and how has it elevated or otherwise India's stature?
See, you all keep making this mistake. It is Air Chief Marshal and not Air Marshal.
Right, sir.
Air Marshals are many, Air Chief Marshals only one at a time.
Sorry.
Just joking. You all heard the Army Chief speak, and he covered the rise of India very, very well. Army speaks in terrain terms, they speak in terms of photographs. Air Force has a little broader view. Let me just start from the beginning, where Mr. Ram Madhav said about emerging nationalism vis-a-vis internationalism. In my opinion, there are three basic reasons why there is a challenge to internationalism coming in slowly. One is the technology has grown, but people haven't grown to meet the technological challenges. The second is, I think, absence of welfare measures which ensure equitable distribution of income. Third, a very, very shaky narrative. You know, you imagine a person who has no job, whose income levels are dropping, income distribution is not equitable. You can't tell him to worry about global warming and things like that. He will say that I am for Trump, America for Americans. So that is why nationalism is rising. India's opinion, we are in favor of multilateralism. But, like Mr. Ram Madhav said, the narrative has to change. It has to be inclusive. It has to include national as well as international citizens. The most important factor is, with the existing rules, there are certain countries, I would not like to name them, but you all know, who hijack these rules for their own geostrategic benefits. Now, this hijacking throws the whole thing into chaos. Now, this is one thing, the modification of rules has to cater for this particular hijacking and to prevent this happening in the future. As far as the question of national security is concerned, Now it's a global village. Let me take you to the military point of view. Wars are going to be short because the international community is going to step in. And the international community is going to ensure that wars are going to be short. Therefore, if you want to achieve your limited gains, these wars have to be more lethal. Technology is increasing by leaps and bounds, especially in the military sphere. They are going to be more lethal. There's not going to be any difference between day and night. They are going to be short, crisp, and very, very bad for the economy, for the entire diaspora. Therefore, in all probability, wars will tend to be avoided. Therefore, the national security has to cater for less than war situations, not only in India's context, but all over the world. It's happening all over the world. There are not many wars after the Second World War, no major wars. Yeah, Iran-Iraq war and a few other small things. We've had our own share of them. But the wars are going to be in less than war situations. The non-state actors are going to play a very important role as far as the future is concerned. Non-state actors, that means they don't have the hierarchical organization like the regular armies, navies, air forces have. They are going to have a very flat organization. There are no leaders that you can identify and eliminate. So each nation has to now cater to this kind of a warfare in the future. That's why security, national security, is going to achieve much more importance. It has to be technology governed. Intelligence will achieve much more importance. And it's not going to be an easy future, in my opinion. Thank you.
Right. Manoj Larva, nationalistic politics also tends to sometimes translate into protectionist policies. You live in London, you've seen a very traumatic exit from Europe. Brexit has happened. We have Donald Trump, who talks about making America great again. We have a very aggressive and assertive China. And yet India espouses the multilateral values. How can India protect national interest, according to you, while also upholding multilateralism?
Thank you very much, Palki, and thank you very much for inviting me. I don't see a conflict between the concept of nationalism in the way in which Ram Madhavji and I believe the other panelists have described and agreed as a non-confrontationalist but aspirational recognitions of one's identity. At the same time, I don't see a rise of a belief in one's nation, a belief in one's nation's ambitions as a rejection in any shape or form of the multilateral agenda. We do need multilateralism. We need cooperation on global issues such as climate change, such as terror, and now coronavirus. So I think the best way for India to ensure that its nationalism, its national pride is in no way in conflict with the international community is to continue to articulate, firstly have self-confidence that its nationalism is not the nationalism of the European past, it's not the nationalism that other countries in the world have espoused, it is a nationalism that is deeply rooted to its culture, which is of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. But secondly, to pursue a multilateral agenda where it is in India's national interest, but secondly, to pursue reform of the institutions that have been failing us. Brexit, you referred to, is a classic example of how Britain has recognized that there is a world outside of the European Union. The European Union has failed to recognize that these national aspirations need to be taken into account as it itself evolves. Fundamentally, the European Union, I don't believe, is a bad institution. I think it has failed to reform. The United Nations has failed to reform. The World Bank and the IMF have been a ping-pong or a family affair between the US and the European Union as far as its leadership is concerned. So these institutions need to reform, and India needs to stake its claim not as a rule taker, but now as a rule maker.
I couldn't agree more. You said that we should have confidence. And yes, pursuing multilateralism can sometimes, Mr. Madhav, be seen as a sign of weakness. So the challenge is to remain assertive while also being accommodative. He also spoke about reforming institutions which are failing. Are organizations like the United Nations still relevant, or have they run their course? Because if everyone's not following the rules, then the system's not working. And India is still lobbying to ensure that motivated interests do not censure it. We do not have a permanent membership to the UN Security Council. So should we still pursue that, or should we ask for a different system altogether?
Firstly, to look at national pride or nationalism as something which is antithetical to multilateralism or internationalism is wrong. They are not necessarily a conflicting ideas, they can be complementary. Show me one country in the world which says that no, I am not great. If some leader says, Trump says, I want to make America great again, per se, every nation says that. We say we want India to become great. National pride is there in every country in the world. But the reality also is that in a connected world, today we are no longer disconnected. Our technologies connect us. Travel connects us. We are increasingly becoming borderless world. Nations, national pride exists, but borders will lose their importance. In such a scenario, multilateralism or global institutions certainly have an important role to play. But all that I'm trying to emphasize, all I tried to emphasize in my initial remarks was that the global institutions of governance that were created in the last century have to undergo major reform for their own survival. You have asked me whether they are relevant or not. This is the question that they have to ask themselves rather than asking us whether they want to remain relevant or not. That's why I gave the example of things like UNCLOS coming under major challenge. Geneva Convention being violated by nations. How do they make them relevant? Only way is to revisit them, bring them relevant, make them relevant to the 21st century reality where it's no longer the nations of Europe and the West which are the dominant powers. It is the nations in the East, countries in the East which have become the new power centers, new powerhouses. They have to find a voice. Why is India not finding a place in the Security Council even to this day? Institutions have to accommodate greater stakeholdership, provide greater stakeholdership to countries in the region in order for their own relevance, in order for their own continuance as important global governance institutions.
Right, so should India wait for the membership to be given to it, or should India fight, was my question. You want to say something?
I just wanted to underline one of the points that Ram Madhavji made by a point of fact, that when each year the subscriptions for the United Nations are due, India is one of a handful of countries that pays them in full and pays them on time.
That's true.
And there are many countries, including many global so-called leaders in the world that fail to do that. India has expressed its intent that it respects global institutions and that it wants to be an active part of those multilateral agendas. So India's asserting its national identity is in no way a statement that it wishes to undermine the international institutions, but they have to reform, and they have to reform very, very quickly.
Right, and the question is who's going to push for that reform and who will make sure, because the current system is working for some people and they will not initiate the change. General Singh, taking forward what Manoj Ladva said, India is also the largest cumulative contributor to the UN peacekeeping missions. should India revisit some of these contributions because there are no real gains?
I'm going to relate to you a very interesting incident. I happened to be sitting next to Mr. Henry Kissinger in 2008 or 9, and he asked for me to come there. I was not on his table, I was on a neighboring table in a dinner. When I went there, he said, General Singh, tell us what should we do in Afghanistan? Now this is a question raised in 2008 or 9, if I remember correctly. I said, Excellency, I wish you had asked this question before getting into this quagmire, before getting into this daldal, as we say in India. But now that you are in it, please don't get away in a hurry. He said, why? I said, then the people who make you get away will say, we are the masters, our tails are up, this is an animal kingdom in a different way. He said, then why don't you help us? I said, Excellency, if there is a blue beret scenario, that possibly our government can consider it. But our policies are such that under American dispensation, India is unlikely, and I'm sure Ram Madhav will support me, India is unlikely to come into this situation. So that was the discussion. Now all I'm trying to say is that India now is shown its hand as far as getting peace and stability in our region is concerned. Our aim is peace and stability. Please don't forget, we have no aggressive intent against any country, nor any design. So we want peace. We want, so there are millions of our countrymen, Chinese, Bangladeshi, Pakistanis, their living standards can be brought up. अमन शांति के बगैर तरक्की हो नहीं सकती, खुशहाली नहीं आ सकती. ये तो आप किसी से भी पूछ लीजिए. मैंने कश्मीर में बहुत नौकरी की है. मैं तो चाहता हूं कि कश्मीर में भी अमन शांति हो ताकि उनकी भी खुशहाली के दिन आ जाएं, जैसे पंजाब. So we have to now think where positively we can play a role, and our government is not going to shy away from it. Mr. Modi has made his intent very clear. I think we had the requirement of somebody who could think about these things. And last one point I want to make before, there are many others, but time nahi hai. Indian passport has got a new sheen on it. When you show the Indian passport, everybody says, that is the country. We are a role model today in the developing world, and in many ways, in the developed world also, they are learning from us. Because hamari Sanskriti to bahut purani hai. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we've also mentioned the neighborhood first policy. India is engaging first with the neighborhood, and that has been the focus. Act East, neighborhood first, has been the focus of this government. Interestingly, since 2016, India has shifted the focus from SAARC to BIMSTEC, which happened with the BRICS summit in Goa. We invited BIMSTEC leaders, and then in 2019, Prime Minister Modi's swearing-in ceremony, BIMSTEC leaders were invited. It is said that this shift is only to isolate Pakistan. Is there anything else that is achieved, or are we making any tangible gains from this shift of focus?
You know, Palki, I'll take this question on in a different manner. The inner circle, as Prime Minister Modi has specified, is the prime foreign policy directive as far as the neighbors are concerned. Good relations with neighbors, as he demonstrated when the Prime Minister took office in 1914, he invited all the nearby neighbors, including Pakistan, all others, to the swearing-in ceremony. His first visits have been to the near neighbors. So India, in the present moment, defines neighborhood welfare as one of the prime objectives of foreign policy. That is one. Point two, sometime back, many people used to think that India interferes in the internal affairs of nearby countries. That perception has now gradually changed, and it is I think, a major effort on the part of the government to change that perception. Point three, in our region, in the neighborhood, there is a tremendous race going on, you all will appreciate, between United States and China for establishing power, including the Indo-Pacific region. Now, what India is doing is playing a very low-key role. So India is now beginning to emerge as a growing country which also supports the smaller neighboring countries and their aspirations. India is encouraging these neighboring countries also to participate along with very major partners, whoever they feel like participating with. So India is slowly emerging as a power in the region, a growing country, I would say, not yet a major regional power, but aspiring towards that, but also taking the neighbors along with her. Now, this is a very good shift in foreign policy that we have been able to achieve over the last few years.
Right. The neighborhood, Manoj Ladva, is also flush with Chinese money. And China has sold 1.99 billion units of arms to Bangladesh. Barring India and Bhutan, I think, all other countries in the neighborhood are signatories to the Belt and Road Initiative. And in an ideal world, we'd like to believe that both India and China have enough avenues to work with the neighborhood, but that we don't live in an ideal world. Is our policy then geared to counter Chinese influence?
I think that we've been talking about, and each panelist has talked about the need to reform and indeed strengthen a rules-based world order. Along with a rules-based world order, I think you have to have in tandem, and this is where India will play a huge role, a values-based rule order, where nations that share similar values of democracy, of human dignity, of ensuring that free trade flows well and it flows securely, where we're able to ensure that there are level playing fields between nations and that the haves and have-nots have an equal stake in the game. That value-based world order is the central point to which we will be able to counter not only China, but other ideologies and nations that have, let's put it, a divergent view to something that we hold very, very closely. So I think by strengthening India's own articulation of what its worldview is, and I believe that its worldview is very, very closely aligned to many countries around the world that look at the current situation with concern. I think we will be in a very, very good position. So just to underline that we need to focus on reforming the rules-based world order that meets the 21st demands of the 21st century, and particularly this region. And secondly, rules alone will not work. They have to be value-based as well.
Indeed, they have to be. Let me...
I just want to underline one point here about India's neighborhood first policy. Please remember that India's neighborhood first policy is not a one-way street. It has a second dimension to it. And that second part is, together we grow. India and its neighbors, as sovereign equals, have every right to chart their developmental course. But just as India believes that it gives priority to its neighbors, we expect our neighbors also understand that our growth should be complementary to each other. When a country like Bangladesh grows, it should help India. When India grows, it should help Bangladesh. And this is the way with all the neighbors. That takes you to that important point, what happened to SAARC and why BIMSTEC. These are not two conflicting things. As we expand our relations in the neighborhood, we moved on to BIMSTEC some years ago. Today, we are talking in terms of creating an Indian Ocean level alliance. It's not again in conflict with BIMSTEC. You increasingly build new alliances, you create new platforms. That is the process in which we have taken our relations in the neighborhood further.
Right. Vis-a-vis China, sir, we are engaging with the Quad. We are talking about the Indian Ocean region. Yes, India is taking a stand, so to speak. But there are instances which make one wonder what is the need of, for want of a better word, this kind of pragmatism. I'll give you an example. If India's voting pattern at the UNGA were to give you a bird's eye view of New Delhi's policy, India abstained from voting on Uyghur Muslims, and this was in October last year, sir. It happened on a day when China called India's Kashmir move unlawful and void. What explains some of these decisions?
I'm probably not competent to answer that fully, but I can give you an overview. We take a stand on United Nations related resolutions and all based on the situation at that juncture. You know, there are many such instances one can quote where India has taken different stamps on different occasions, especially on the issue of West Asian conflict. We have taken different positions on different resolutions. So it is specific to a resolution, it is specific to a situation that we sometimes take decisions.
Yes, General Singh, our engagement with China is, I think, the best example of what we're calling creative diplomacy. We saw Doklam in the recent years, then we saw Mamallapuram as well, we saw Wuhan. So there's a very fine balancing act that is being done by Delhi.
Yes. Palki, yes, very important. A point which has not yet been covered, so I'm going to cover it, is about the international dynamics of the balance of power, of the equilibrium in the world. There was earlier the Cold War, the Russian camp and the American camp or the Western camp, and it became Warsaw and NATO. Now these are gone. NATO is dwindling. European Union is also going down. America is retracting. What is emerging in their place is, I would say, going globally, if you look at it, there is a Shanghai Cooperation Organization with China, Russia, and now India has also joined them and some countries there.
And Pakistan.
Yes, Pakistan very much. And then we have another one, which is the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Very strong grouping. Then they have the other ASEAN, you have the SAARC, and you have our own regional areas. And as Ram Madhav brought out, that India is also thinking of the Indian Ocean. Now, these are the equations in which we will try to balance the equilibrium of the world power situation. We cannot wish away. There will be fights, there will be clashes, there will be conflicts, but controlled because you have had a good balancing system. You have an equilibrium which is being maintained. For example, today we are here, but Syria and Turkey are having a war. A small war, maybe localized war, but they're having a war. There's blood, aircraft being used, everything, guns, everything. So what I'm trying to say is the world has evolved a number of these triangular, and we also have the quadrilateral, India, Japan, Australia, and America. So these are all meant not as a threat to anybody, according to my judgment, but also as a, let's put it this way, to stabilizing factor. The world does not want to see war. And particularly, two things I will also add. Our region is the most nuclearized region in the world. We have India, Pakistan, China, and to some extent Iran as well, who are some capability of nuclear weapons. So it's a dangerous scene. And out of these countries, some, I don't want to name, have been declared internally by the think tanks and all that to be not so stable, not to be so responsible, not to be also taken for granted. So the risk is there. What I'm trying to come to is that today we want a peaceful world, and we don't want our future generations, or we don't want the world to get out into a catastrophe. So these are the things which also are takeaways from this kind of a discussion, that the world is working out dynamics of stabilizing by various equations between number of countries and number of groupings. Thank you.
Air Chief Marshal Naik, do you think that the global support that India received on its Kashmir move, Article 370, is proof of India's diplomatic success, not just with traditional partners, but with countries in West Asia, with countries which have traditionally supported Pakistan? They've all backed India, more or less, on Kashmir. I'm saying, is it proof, according to you, of India's diplomatic success? The kind of backing that India's Kashmir move has received?
In my opinion, Kashmir issue has been misunderstood by quite a few people in the world. I don't know, because of some propaganda. There are few facts which are indisputable. First, that it was a Muslim majority state before it acceded to India. Second fact, accession to India is a fact. It's done by the Maharaja. Third fact, 1954, it was regularized by the Constituent Assembly of J&K. Fourth fact, the UN resolution lapsed because Pakistan failed to withdraw their troops from that region. Kashmir has been with us for the last so many years. We've held so many elections there. We've had regular governments over there. Now, of course, it's a union territory. There should not be any doubt in anybody's mind that Kashmir is not an integral part of India. You may have wishful thinking. It should have been mine, should have been Junagadh, should have been mine, that should have been mine and all that. It's okay, nice. You should have these feelings. But Kashmir is an integral part of India and there should be no doubt about it. Whether the world supports it or not, it still is an integral part of India. That's it.
Absolutely. And post the Kashmir move, Manoj Ladwa, and the CAA, we've seen an interesting pattern. Let me quote examples. New Delhi expressed concerns about Turkey causing humanitarian and civil distress in occupied Kurdish areas after Turkey criticized India on Kashmir. Then we saw Malaysia. The payback came in the form of a slash in palm oil imports. Is this a new form of tit-for-tat diplomacy?
Look, you're going to always see in this world now where there is a reaction one way, the spotlight will quickly fall upon another nation or another region. That's because of the advent of the internet and channels like yourselves that you will see that. So nations, I think, will become more and more circumspect about interfering in the internal affairs of other nations. And to underline the Air Chief Marshal's point that wars will be very limited, be very, very focused, and you will start to see a scenario where, given the way in which media operates and news operates, the nations are going to be more and more circumspect, is what my view is. But going back to the issue of Kashmir, I live and work in the UK. Yes, there were some concerns raised to begin with, but frankly, it's a non-issue. It's a non-issue for the majority of the world, and you saw that. You can call that the success of Indian diplomacy on one hand, but actually it's a settled issue as far as the rest of the world's concerned. What the world actually wants is for India's economy to grow, for India to take its rightful place in the world and to become, as I said earlier on, part of the rule-making process rather than a rule-taker. Because there is a huge amount of potential. Indians will account for 1/4 of the world's workforce within the next 15 to 20 years. We have a huge role to play. So therefore, just as Ram Madhavji said, and a lot of people have said, that there has been a dehyphenation of India's policy vis-a-vis other countries. I think other countries are now also realizing that when they talk about India, they've got to talk about the world and India's place in the world, rather than just limiting to big brother and cousin. Mm-hmm. And that's where we have to ensure that that dialogue continues, that India has a much bigger role to play rather than the important regional role as well.
I want your thoughts on this. Is India now sending out a message that it will accommodate only as long as the response from the other side does not impinge on India's interests?
Look, hypocrisy should not become the hallmark in criticizing us. People trying to throw stones should remember that they are sitting in glass houses. Let Turkey understand, our countries criticizing or questioning our stand in Kashmir understand that, as Air Chief Marshal pointed out, Jammu and Kashmir
is an integral part of India. What we do there is a question between our government and people of Jammu and Kashmir, not the business of anybody else. And I also want to remind the world that the Kashmir, which is under illegal occupation of Pakistan, was split into two in 60s. Its status was altered in 60s. Why nobody raised any question about it? So the point is not about tit for tat diplomacy. It's about hypocrisy of the nations that are raising questions over the internal matters of our country. No self-respecting nation would allow other countries to meddle in the internal affairs of its own. Jammu and Kashmir is our own internal affair. We know how to handle it. Our only touchstone is that people of Jammu and Kashmir, they should be happy, they should be satisfied, they should see development reaching their doorsteps. On that, we are fully committed.
I can't let you go without asking this then. What do you say then to the critics of the people who question the various tours that are organized to Jammu and Kashmir? If it is an internal matter, why must we seek any sort of validation from MPs in Europe and elsewhere?
The situation in Jammu and Kashmir has been projected outside by certain interested sections, anarchist liberals. You know, the funny situation that we are facing today is the radical liberals don't even have faith in democratic institutions anymore. Their faith now is in anarchy. They propagate as though Jammu Kashmir is a conflict zone. The phrase that is used all the time is, it's a conflict zone. Let me tell the audience here, most of those Indians know about it. The Kashmir Valley, which has seen terrorism in last 3 decades, courtesy our neighbor, constitutes 3 parliament seats in India's 542 strong parliament house. It constitutes 3 parliament seats. Out of the 3 parliament seat areas, 2 parliament seat areas in Kashmir Valley have largely been always peaceful. There is 1 parliament seat area comprising 3 districts which has seen terror incidents successively. Now, what is the projection globally? That huge militarization is happening. Huge conflict zone has been created. This false narrative about Kashmir, which the Kashmiris do not approve of. Friends, 8 months have passed since we have abrogated Article 370. Not a single major violent incident in Kashmir Valley today. People of Kashmir Valley have largely approved of the measures that the government has taken. We are committed to their welfare. But since propaganda is going on, we offered to our friends, the international friends, if you want to come and see, please go and see it for yourselves. Look at what is there in the ground situation. We have nothing to hide. You should be praising our move rather than finding fault with it. And they have gone, and ambassadors came back and told me, so we are surprised. We have encountered traffic jams in Srinagar city. That is the reality on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir today. Life is absolutely normal. Internet has also been restored yesterday. Life is normal. 5-6 leaders are still in detention. They will also be let off. I mean, we don't have any intention to keep leaders behind bars for a very long time. Like in the past, they will be let off. But let me tell you, that they should be let off is not the demand coming from the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Nobody is asking us. Nobody is asking us to set them free.
But that is an internal matter I don't want to discuss, only to reassure you that no question of any human rights violations, full political freedom also will be given. Already it is there, but those who are in detention will also be freed sooner than later.
Right. A very interesting point you made. I think it's a sign of the times we live in, that traffic jams are a sign of normalcy. On that note, I think we'll have to wrap this session. Thank you very much for your thoughts.
Well, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honour to be and pleasure to be back at WION's Global Summit, and congratulations to the team for making such a great, creating such a great gathering and discussing such hot topics. Now, of course, the topic of climate change is very much on the agenda across the world with news organizations. I heard a story that the US President Donald Trump was looking for advice, looking for good advice. And he'd heard or noticed that the British government runs fairly efficiently. So while on a trip to the UK, he was visiting with the Queen, and he said, Your Majesty, I have to ask you, how does your government run so efficiently? Could you give me some tip? She said, look, the most important thing is you need good, intelligent people around you. He said, well, how do I know that they're really intelligent? She said, I'll show this. And she called over Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. She said, you have to ask them riddles. Watch this. She said, Mr. Johnson, your mother and your father had a child. It wasn't your brother and it wasn't your sister. Who was it? And Boris Johnson said, well, that was me, of course. Very good. So Trump smiles. It's very good. Okay. She said, see, you just asked them a riddle. So he gets back to the USA and he calls Mike Pence, his vice president. He says, Mike, I've got to ask you a riddle. And Mike Pence says, sure. He says, your mother and your father had a child. It wasn't your brother. It wasn't your sister. Who was it? Pence said, I'm not really sure. Let me get back to you. So Pence goes off. He asks all his advisors, what do I do? This, mother and father, who's it? No one could answer. Then he happened to be in the gents' room, and Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, walked in. And he said, Mike, I've got a question for you. Your mother and your father had a child. It wasn't your brother. It wasn't your sister. Who was it? And Mike Pompeo says, well, easy. That was me, of course. So Pence smiles to himself. He goes back to President Trump. He says, ask me that riddle again. And President Trump says, okay, so your mother and your father had a child. It wasn't your brother. It wasn't your sister. Who was it? And Mike Pence says, easy. It was Mike Pompeo. And Trump says, you idiot, it's Boris Johnson. So sometimes getting intelligent answers is very difficult when it comes to climate change. Equally challenging, as you can tell. For years, scientists have warned about the damage that human neglect and abuse is doing to our planet, and slowly, and perhaps not surely, there's been a broad and global recognition for the need to do something before it's too late. So let's not point fingers, but it's certainly not very helpful when voices in authority deny that there's any issue to be concerned about, because to whatever degree, pardon the pun, there is definitely something to be concerned about when it comes to global temperatures with all these issues that we've been discussing that Palki introduced too. It seems we're more inclined to listen to the impassioned pleas of a teenage girl than highly educated men and women in lab coats spouting facts and figures. So the title of this session is, perhaps aptly, At the Front Line of Climate Change, Climate Wake-Up Call and Signals of Hope. And we have a distinguished panel that was introduced to you just a moment ago to discuss this. So I'm going to get straight to some questions. And Your Excellency, I want to welcome you. And I'm going to ask each of you a question, starting with you. How worried should we, as individuals, be about climate change? And have we reached perhaps the point where it's actually now irreparable? Please, I'll start with you. Yeah.
For anyone that is following the news, the world news around what's happening climate-wise, should know that climate change is already happening big times. And I myself, I come from Greenland. And I flew down from Greenland yesterday from -40 to this wonderful temperature here. First of all, thank you for having me here. And thank you. And I represent a population of 56,000 people. It's a very, very small population that have lived in the Arctic for thousands of years. We are living in Greenland where the ice cap is more than 3 kilometers thick, 2.2 million square kilometer. It's the biggest ice mass in the Nordic Hemisphere, the biggest ice mass after Antarctica. I see myself right out through my window, right through everywhere, that the ice cap is melting all year round. Normally, it would be melting like in summer temperatures of June till October. Now, it's melting ever as strong as it is before. And the icebergs are massive, and they're melting crazy, and the temperatures are rising in Greenland. Last summer, we came up to all the way to 20 degrees Celsius. That is unheard before. and that results in the Greenland ice cap melting more than 5 times more than the scientists predicted just for about a couple of years ago. So this is serious matters, and Greenland ice cap right now is probably one of the most well-monitored location in the world to figure out how the ice cap is traveling and how fast it's melting. And I must say that because of the ice cap, the seriousness about it's not just the weather, it is also changing the world politics. It is changing our perception of how we should live, and it is changing our economy, it's changing our perception of how the globe is functioning. So I think the climate change as it is seeing, it is changing us in all matters.
Thank you, Ms. Hammond. Now, the reason I phrased it, why should we as individuals be worried, is because I grew up, I'm turning 58. I grew up in a time where, growing up in Britain, people didn't think twice about littering. Now, if I see someone throw something on the floor, I feel very angry. I was growing up in a generation we had no real clue about climate change or no concern, no suggestions. I mean, if we got the sun shining in Britain in the summer, we were pleasantly surprised. It didn't happen very often. But now it's got to the stage where I think there's much more awareness, and it seems there is a younger generation leading the charge. And Vanessa, I'm glad to have you here as well. It seems that there's a generation coming up now. I have a daughter who's turning 14, a generation that's coming up that is far more aware and don't carry the baggage of my generations and a couple of generations around me where we really didn't have a clue of what was going on. Tell me from the younger person's perspective, you're in your early 20s, how you see the seriousness of the matter.
Thank you so much for having me. The issue of climate change needs to get all of us worried, not just the young people, because we see mainly the young people going out there demanding for action. It's like we are the only ones who are seeing the impacts. When you look around the world, you see devastating impacts of climate change. For example, I'll start with India. Last year, the temperatures rose up to 50.6 degrees and caused heat waves all over India. I'm certain you heard about the water stress in Chennai that left many people struggling to get just a drop of water for survival. Personally, I come from Uganda, that's in Africa, where I've also seen the impacts of climate change. Most of the people in my community and Africa at large, and I guess in most Asian countries, most of the people depend on agriculture for their survival. As we sit here comfortably, not all of us here depend on the agriculture, but yet the food that you eat is prepared by those who are at the front lines of the climate crisis. When these people are affected by the floods that come about by the increasing sea level rises, they lose everything. They lose their hopes and dreams for survival on this planet. Most of them just survive on their subsistence farming. They're left with nothing to feed their children. They're left with nothing for their families. Especially in most families where the women have to do everything to provide food on the table. I'm talking about the people who live in rural communities who are at the front lines of the climate crisis. We who are seated here comfortably will only be affected by the prices. But of course, you have the money to buy the food regardless of how expensive it is. But then they have to work hard to try and get something for their children, to get food for their families. That is why everyone is needed in the fight against the climate crisis. It affects different people from different parts of the world. We are seeing the wildfires in Australia, California. We've seen the floods in Jakarta. We've seen all these disasters. What else do we need? We need to stop at the words. We need to stop at the promises and do the action. all of us need to be worried about the future because it is uncertain. If you cannot do it for me, then do it for your children. If you cannot do it for the young people in Asia or the young people all over the world, do it for your grandchildren. And if you can't do it for yourself, at least do it for your conscience.
Vanessa, thank you very much. Interesting you said that, you mentioned the various conditions that we're encountering around the world. I've been in the news business over 35 years, and at the early stages we never associated any of the disasters that we were reporting on to be connected with climate change. That's something that's come up more. I'm going to bring in Professor James Terry here. And Professor, the reason I asked from an individual perspective is because individual thought is guided by what we consider to be valid information. And I wonder how it frustrates you as someone who works in the environmental sciences to hear sometimes a lack of leadership. We have a US president who's in denial. We have scientists giving evidence as well, but then there's people who are often just coming up with counter-arguments. How frustrating do you find that?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to be here. It can be frustrating, but as a scientist, of course, we understand that data is always changing. So I can understand that sometimes there might be some skepticism towards science, but that's because the nature of science is such that we have new methods, we have new techniques, we have new tools at our disposal, we have new modelling that didn't exist 1, 2 or 3 decades ago. So what that means is that there's always going to be change in information that's given. There's always going to be refinement in the kinds of data that can be provided. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't act. Your question originally was, should we feel concerned as individuals? Well, of course, we should if we have compassion for our fellow man. I'm privileged and fortunate to have spent a large part of my career as an academic, but not based where I grew up in the United Kingdom, but in the Pacific Islands. I spent 12 years at the University of the South Pacific, which is an island nation university covering 12 different island nations spread across a huge area of the South Pacific. And people there, of course, are facing very real threats in various different forms. The islands in the South Pacific are not all the same. They vary. There are tall volcanic islands, there are low-lying atolls, and the kinds of vulnerabilities that people will experience might be different according to where you live. Now, the kinds of changes that people are experiencing will be, first of all, long-term slow changes, such as sea level rise and changing ocean temperatures, but also things like stress on groundwater, stress on available land, loss of coastlines, retreat of shorelines. And of course, if you live in a small island, then your available resources are perhaps limited. So I think, we should all be concerned with making sure that whatever position we find ourselves in, we regard our neighbours, we regard those that might be in very more serious situations than ourselves, and take appropriate action. There are 2 kinds of action that can be taken. Of course, there is mitigation, which means trying to reduce the causes of climate change. But then there's also adaptation, and adaptation means dealing with the consequences. Some countries, of course, can't do much in terms of global mitigation, and they're forced to adapt. We should reach out to make sure that the science gives correct information, to make sure that our decision-making is based on up-to-date information, and not to ignore the plight of people who might be in a situation where they're going to have to act very quickly and very soon to combat some of the worst effects.
Professor, thank you. Alika Hammond, as I bring you in for a response, I also want to point out, Greenland, of course, is a country where mitigation and adaptation are going to be affected by, a small population, so there's not much you can do in terms of mitigation, but you have indicated that even in your lifetime, you're seeing the need for adaptation because a large part of the population is Inuit and they're very in tune with nature and the conditions. They're having to adapt quite quickly, aren't they?
We are still living very much traditional today in terms of using land and sea ice. both my brothers are professional hunters. They're out on the sea ice every single day to bring in the food that we have to eat, but also to sell one of the best quality fish around the world. So we are out on the sea ice every single day. We notice right now, even though Greenland is very big, it's the biggest island of the world. And we are living all around Greenland, sort of like 20 different places of towns that we are staying at. And adaptation is not something that you have to wait for others to start. Adaptation towards climate change, Greenland has been working on that for years. 75% of our electricity that we produce are coming from clean energy, from the lakes that are being created by the ice melting. And we are planning on becoming 100% produced on renewable energy by year 2030. We are one of the world leading in adaptation to the new opportunities that our country is giving us. But at the same time, adaptation is not just on the energy side. The world is also noticing that the the North Pole region is changing. The ice retrieving means that your ability to use it as a new freight route in the coming years is of great economic interest for the outside world. And because of that, China has announced the North Pole region to be one of the most important Silk Roads in the coming years to see. NATO notices that, and Russia is also taking advantage of it and also creating their own new air bases, not even 1,000 kilometers further away than Greenland. That means the North Pole region is becoming another area for military interest around the world. And that is, so to speak, as they use it, military adaptation to the new world. But that is creating a new threat for the Arctic region, because many of these countries are talking about the Arctic as if there are no people and no governments and no parliaments. But they are people with their own governments and parliaments and have their rights to their own land. So I think adaptation is also very much on policy, how you see the world, and that how you are dealing with the countries around the world, not only on climate-wise, but also because of the climate consequences, what is happening between the nations and the interests around the world.
It's interesting you mentioned the geomilitary impact that's taking place. You know, Vanessa, when I introduced you, the news business loves catchphrases, and I described you as an activist. It's a term also used for Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish teenager who's also very much in the limelight with this. How do you feel about the term activist? Shouldn't we all be activists now?
Earth does not just belong to us, the young people. It belongs to everyone. Earth is our home and it's our responsibility. So everyone is needed as an activist because we are all benefiting from what Earth provides for us.
But in terms of, you know, it's very much younger people who are in the forefront now. Why do you think the world is more keen to listen to young people than anyone else? What do you think really has triggered this interest in what the young voice says?
Well, the future belongs to the young people, and this is something that hasn't happened for quite a long time, for young people to rise up together, over 5 million young people to demand for action, and not to just demand, but to be focused and determined on the demands that they're setting on their governments. I think this is what has really made the movement be known in different parts of the world, and that is what has attracted different young people to join the movement, because when they realize that their future is at stake, then they have to fight for it. I mean, as young people, we have dreams, we have hopes, we've gone to school, we have things that we hope to achieve, but then we're not sure if we'll be able to enjoy all those things or achieve the things that we want with a future that is so uncertain. So we are trying to clean up the mess that was created by those who have already lived half of their lives.
It's interesting you raise that. To what extent do you, blame previous generations. To what extent does it make you angry? We hear Greta quite impassioned in her speeches. She has a particular way of speaking, but to what degree do you blame past generations? How much are we responsible?
Well, the older generations have taken decisions that have put the future of the people coming later on, or the people that are living right now, at stake. They have taken up decisions and carried out activities, for example, investments in the fossil fuel industry, that have put us at stake. They have chosen profits over the planet. They have chosen profits over the lives of the people in this world. That is why we are angry. That is why we are demanding for action. And that is why we want change. Because I believe that before all these developments that brought about climate change and the climate crisis, people were still living, but they were able to adjust and transition to this new system. So what we are demanding for is a more sustainable path to development. We are not against development, but we believe that there is a path to development that is more sustainable, and that's what we want. I mean, we want to try and live our lives, we want to survive, we want to achieve very many things.
So, Professor, what Vanessa is referring to is, of course, a transition from the negative impact you've had through fossil fuels and kind of lack of consideration for the environment. How can that transition be realistically achieved? From a scientific perspective, it can't change overnight, can it? So we have to some degree, accept there has to be a transition. At what pace?
That's, of course, very difficult to answer. You know, it depends very much on where you are, on how your economy is developing, and, you know, each country's own individual aspirations. I mean, we all need to have ambition to assist in, you know, in the global frameworks that exist in terms of, you know, tackling these kinds of issues. You know, some countries, for example, around the South China Sea, find themselves facing extreme, you know, problems in the not too distant future. There are very large cities, megacities, that exist on deltas. For example, Bangkok has a population of 10 million people, you know, living on the Chao Phraya Delta, just a metre above sea level. You have the Brahmaputra Delta, you have the Irrawaddy in Myanmar. You know, around the world there will be people who are facing greater risk, and they will feel as though there's much more urgency. I think the problem is that many of us don't feel that same urgency if we're living in fairly comfortable societies where you don't on a daily basis have to face these kinds of challenges. But those challenges will come. You know, as I said before, there are the long-term slow changes that we should expect. But also, one of the knock-on effects is likely to be perhaps increasing numbers of natural hazards that have severe impacts leading to global scale disasters. You know, we cannot link any individual particular event, such as a hurricane or a typhoon or a wildfire, overall to climate change, but it's certainly true that we should anticipate in the future seeing more of these kinds of extreme events. Those are the things which really have huge impacts on economies around the world, in particular regions, especially for coastal populations. You know, when you are a megacity and you're living near to sea level, your resources, your development, your infrastructure, your tourism is facing these kinds of events, these extreme events. Well, of course, the transition is going to need to be quicker and sooner rather than later. You know, there are various options that can be taken, and it's not all about the mitigation, as we heard from Her Excellency. The adaptation needs to be culturally sensitive. You know, I think part of the problem is that often in the past, scientists have come into particular regions and tried to tell local communities, you know, what might be good for them. I think those days have gone. I think modern science needs to make sure that it embraces traditional environmental knowledge. That can be extremely important, to make sure that you're listening to the stakeholders, and this is called participatory research, to make sure that everybody's engaged so that the solutions that are reached are always acceptable to the people who have to implement them. It's no good scientists coming along and saying, well, this is the technique or the method or the adaptation we think is good for you, without having people at the grassroots levels engaged at all parts of the discussion.
I'm going to swing around to solutions again in just a moment, but I'm going to throw this out there, Malika Hammond, and to you as well, Vanessa. It's interesting that the strongest voices, to some degree, seem to be coming from women. I was brought up by my mother, essentially, and learned to respect, where women can stand on things. And South Asia's proved with leadership that women have been very strong leaders. I wonder, is this something that's quite significant, that leadership is coming a lot more from women when it comes to climate change awareness?
Well, I don't know how it is in the other countries, but in Greenland, women have always been very strong. We represent women approximately, we are 50-50 in our parliament, 50% men, 50% women, approximately there. We don't even have to do extra for women. We want to try to do extra for our men, because many of our men are not doing strong enough as the women are doing in society. If you see the level of educatedness, if you see the level of important posts around the society, the women are leading very, very strongly ahead than the men. So we would like to do more for our men.
Thank you.
And comparing to regarding the climate change, and I think the adaptation and climate change and awareness is not a question of gender. It is a question of leadership in the country, leadership being able to see what is best for your country, but also at the same time see what's best for the world. And I think that the Inuit people, as I'm representing, we have always been living by the ice, with the ice. We want the ice. We don't want the ice to disappear. And right now, we see that our men are telling us that the sea ice is thinning very, very strongly. And if the sea ice is thinning strongly, that means our livelihood is in danger. So it's very important that we talk about climate change at all levels, not only within the policy, but also in the whole society, especially with our children, because they are the ones that are going to carry out the negative consequences if we, as decision makers today, haven't taken our job seriously.
Vanessa, I want to get a young woman's perspective. Again, is it, in your opinion, or have you seen that there's more leadership coming from young women? And again, women in the community. I mean, we say Mother Nature, for example. I'm not sure if that has an impact, but what's your view?
Yeah, in regards to climate change, women stand out as the strongest voice because they are most affected by the impacts of the climate crisis. For example, in most communities, most families around the world, it is women that put food on the table. Through their hard work, they go to their gardens, they go to their farms, they carry out the crop production. But when these disasters happen, for example, flooding or droughts, and these crops are affected, it is this woman's hard work that has been put to zero. So they have to do everything they can to restore what has been lost, so that they can provide for their children. When there is water stress, I saw the photos of the Chennai water stress. Women were the most people carrying buckets and jerrycans, trying to get some water for their families. That is why they stand out loudest and demand for action, because these things affect them the most. When hurricanes occur and people's homes are destroyed, they are single mothers. They are displaced and they are left homeless without where to stay. And this also increases the levels of sexual violence against these women, because they have to sleep on the streets with their children. Last year, I also read an article that was talking about girls being given up as brides as a result of climate change. This is because when families lose everything, they try as much as possible to reduce on the number of the children at home. And in that, they make very heartbreaking decisions and give up the girl child for marriage so that they can reduce on the number of the people in their family. So when you look at all these things, you realize that climate change really affects women the most. And that is why they're speaking out the most. In most communities, women are not allowed to climb trees, but we know that when there is a flood, the first adaptation method to surviving the flood is climbing a tree. So most of them will die because they cannot climb the tree. Most women are found pregnant during these disasters, so they cannot easily survive. So personally, I can say if one man or two men die during a climate disaster, I believe that 6 women die in that same climate disaster. That is why we stand out the most and demand for action.
So as we start wrapping up, I'm going to get back to you, Professor, and ask about something you touched on, is solutions. What danger is there, do you think, that the news agenda often just shifts very quickly, that climate change will be, dare I say, a passing fad?
Well, look, first of all, am I allowed to comment on the last question?
Oh, please, absolutely.
The role of women in science, extremely important. It has to be nurtured, it has to be encouraged, there has to be funding behind this. My previous position at the National University of Singapore, where I was in the geography department, our geography and environmental program had more than 60% women enrolled. So that shows you that in the future it's going to be a greater number of women in terms of Southeast Asia expertise. Here at Zayed University, this is a women's progressive university which was set up for improving the human capital, female human capital in science. And I think that that's absolutely fantastic. It's wonderful to see. At the moment, we have students who have had placements in senior positions in environmental protection agencies, in the space program, in energy and water sectors in Dubai, and that is, I think, the way forward. And I think the UAE is a beacon in terms of women's role in science. To get back to your other question, will climate change be a fad? I don't think it will. It's here to stay. Certainly there are shifts in direction. Certainly we have to address new concerns. When I was a child at school in the 1970s, the big theme was desertification. This was the topic that was on everybody's lips. Probably it's fair to say that much of the problems to do with desertification were climate related at that time, in addition to growing populations and pressure for agriculture and so on. But, climates have always been changing. We must remember that in the Earth's 4.5 billion year history, there's never been a period when the Earth's climate has been stable, and that needs to be recognised. What's different about the modern era is that the human contribution, the anthropogenic contribution, is different. This is something which is new, and the more humans there are on the planet, the more the impact we are going to have, and therefore this cannot be something which is just going to disappear.
So, following with the theme that CEO Sudhir mentioned at the beginning, let's have some solutions. One minute from each of you on suggestions to the people in this room on what they can do to be an active player in creating change as an individual. I'll start with you, Professor, and then I'll work back to you, all of you.
Individuals, well, I think we just have to make sure that we're behind our own national programs in terms of funding. Often new solutions are trial and error. You have to, first of all, give them a fair attempt, and we learn by our mistakes. We have science, which helps to give possible ideas about how we can address various issues, but the kinds of responses won't be the same everywhere around the world. What we have to do is to make sure that we are behind science, make sure that science is well funded, and make sure that any new solutions, are given a fair go first of all before we criticise.
Okay. Vanessa, a recommendation to the people in this room, what would you say? Just 1 minute.
People need to stop running away from the conversation of climate change. Many people find it very uncomfortable to talk about climate change, so they need to stop that because it affects all of us. And then there are people who act interested in learning about climate change, but when we offer the solutions, they're not willing to take them up. So we need to embrace the conversation of climate change, and we need to stand together to demand for action and to also take the action. And then lastly, we need to use our voices, because our voices are powerful, and I personally believe that they can cause change in whatever sphere of life.
All right. Ms. Hammond.
I think when we talk about climate change, the most important word in this one is the change. I think it requires for us to adapt to the climate change requires that we change how we think, change how we do our policy, and change how we do talk about climate, change in how we raise our children for adaptation. The biggest change is within ourselves, in ourselves, to adapt to the climate change. So I think that a lot of people, they want change, but they don't want to change at home. It requires, there's no in-between. It is very important that you have a political leadership that also takes this change seriously. Investments for renewable energy is very costly, but trust me, it is the only way ahead, and you cannot postpone it. It requires a very strong leadership to invest in that, because this is an investment that's to the better change.
Thank you. So, ladies and gents, the conversation obviously doesn't end, and each of you has a role to play. A big round, warm round of applause for our panelists, please. Thank you.
And welcome, you're watching WION World is One. I am Shobit Mittal. The third edition of WION's Global Summit is being held, and here are all the headlines from that summit.
As Air Chief Marshal pointed out, Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. What we do there is a question between our government and people of Jammu and Kashmir, not the business of anybody else.
BJP General Secretary Ram Madhav speaking at WION's Global